I thought this was just a small issue, something minor that would resolve itself if I gave it a little time and didn't make a big deal out of it. At first, it barely registered as a problem at all. It felt like one of those everyday inconveniences that everyone deals with, the kind you shrug off and move past without a second thought. I told myself it wasn't worth the stress or the confrontation, and that mindset made it easy to ignore the early signs that something deeper was unfolding. As days passed, the issue didn't disappear the way I expected. Instead, it quietly grew. Small moments of discomfort started appearing more often, and conversations felt slightly off. I noticed changes in tone, in behavior, in the way people reacted to me. But I kept convincing myself I was overthinking it. I believed acknowledging it would somehow make it bigger than it really was. So I stayed silent and hoped time would smooth things out. That silence turned out to be a mistake. What I thought was patience was actually avoidance. The problem, left unaddressed, began to affect other parts of my life. It influenced my mood, my focus, and my relationships. What had once felt manageable now felt heavy, and I couldn't trace exactly when it crossed that line. I realized too late that small issues don't stay small when they're ignored. When the situation finally came to the surface, the reaction was far stronger than I had imagined. People had been carrying their own interpretations, frustrations, and assumptions while I stayed quiet. My attempt to keep things calm had only created confusion. In that moment, it became clear that minimizing a problem doesn't make it disappear. It just delays the impact. Looking back, I understand that the real mistake wasn't the issue itself, but my decision to underestimate it. I learned that addressing things early, even when they seem minor, is an act of responsibility, not drama. I thought this was just a small issue, but it taught me a lasting lesson about communication, awareness, and the cost of silence. After that realization, I started paying closer attention to the patterns I had ignored before. I replayed earlier moments in my head and saw how many opportunities I'd had to speak up. Each time I chose comfort over clarity, thinking I was keeping the peace. What I didn't understand then was that peace built on silence is fragile. It only lasts until the pressure underneath becomes too heavy to hold. I decided to finally address the issue, even though it felt overdue. The conversation was uncomfortable and emotionally charged, but it was also honest. Things that had been left unsaid came out all at once. And while that was overwhelming, it was also relieving. I realized that people weren't as upset about the issue itself as they were about feeling unheard and unsure for so long. That experience changed how I handle small problems now. I no longer wait for certainty before speaking. I speak to create it. I've learned that clarity early on prevents damage later. Even if the conversation is awkward, it's far less painful than dealing with the consequences of prolonged silence. I thought this was just a small issue, but it reshaped how I communicate and how I respect both my own feelings and the feelings of others. What seemed insignificant at first became one of my most important lessons. Nothing is truly small if it's quietly affecting the people involved. From that point forward, I became more aware of how easily people dismiss their own discomfort. I saw myself in others brushing off concerns with the same words I had once used. It's nothing. It'll pass. I don't want to make it awkward. Those phrases felt familiar, almost protective, but now I recognize them as warning signs. They were often the first step toward misunderstanding, not harmony. I also noticed how much energy it had taken to keep pretending everything was fine. Once the issue was finally addressed, there was an unexpected sense of relief. The tension I had normalized disappeared, and I understood how heavy unspoken thoughts can become over time. That weight doesn't vanish on its own. It just shifts, often turning into resentment or distance. The lesson stayed with me in subtle ways. I became quicker to check in, to ask questions, and to clarify intentions. I learned that raising a concern doesn't mean assigning blame. Most of the time, it simply opens the door to understanding. People can't respond to what they don't know exists now. When something feels small but persistent, I pause instead of ignoring it. I ask myself whether staying quiet is truly keeping the peace or just postponing discomfort. I thought this was just a small issue, but it taught me that awareness and communication are not overreactions. They are the foundation of healthy connections. That awareness slowly became a habit. Instead of letting doubts linger in my mind, I started addressing them while they were still manageable. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was consistent. Each small conversation built trust, both in my relationships and in myself. I realized that speaking up didn't make me difficult or dramatic, as I once feared. It made me present and engaged. I also learned to recognize the difference between conflict and honesty. For a long time, I had treated them as the same thing, avoiding both whenever possible. Now I understood that honesty, when handled with care, actually prevents conflict rather than creating it. By addressing issues early, I gave others the chance to explain, adjust, or simply be heard, and that often dissolved tension before it grew. Looking back, I'm grateful the issue revealed itself before causing irreversible damage. It could have cost me important relationships or opportunities if I had continued ignoring it. Instead, it became a turning point that reshaped how I communicate and how seriously I take my own instincts. I thought this was just a small issue, but it ended up changing the way I navigate relationships and responsibility. It reminded me that paying attention early is not overthinking it's self-respect with time. That lesson settled deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about speaking up when something felt wrong, but also about listening when others did the same. I became more attentive to subtle changes in people's behavior, understanding that what looks minor on the surface can carry emotional weight underneath. This awareness made my interactions more thoughtful and less reactive. I also stopped waiting for the perfect moment to address concerns. I learned that such a moment rarely exists. There will always be discomfort, uncertainty, or fear of misunderstanding. What matters is choosing clarity over convenience. Each time I did, I felt more grounded, more aligned with my values. Even if the outcome wasn't immediately smooth, the experience reshaped my sense of responsibility. I realized that avoiding a problem doesn't make you neutral. It makes you absent. Being present means engaging, even when it's uncomfortable. That understanding extended beyond relationships into my work and personal decisions, guiding me to act sooner and with more intention. I thought this was just a small issue, but it became a quiet teacher. It showed me that growth often begins with noticing what we're tempted to ignore, and that real maturity lies in addressing small things before they become unmanageable. That lesson continued to echo in moments when I least expected it. Simple interactions began to feel more meaningful because I was fully present instead of distracted by unspoken thoughts. I noticed how quickly misunderstandings could be resolved when addressed early, and how much emotional energy was saved by choosing honesty over avoidance. What once felt risky now felt necessary. I also became more forgiving toward myself for past silence. I understood that I had acted with the tools and awareness I had at the time. Growth didn't require shame. It required reflection. Accepting that allowed me to move forward without carrying the weight of regret. Each new situation became an opportunity to apply what I had learned rather than repeat old patterns. Over time, the fear of making things worse by speaking up disappeared. I saw that most people appreciated clarity, even when it was uncomfortable at first. Silence had been far more damaging than any honest conversation I had avoided. That realization strengthened my confidence and helped me trust my instincts instead of second-guessing them. I thought this was just a small issue, but it quietly transformed how I show up in my life. It taught me that awareness, courage, and communication don't require dramatic moments. Sometimes, the smallest issues carry the biggest lessons, shaping who we become in ways we only understand later. That understanding stayed with me as life moved on, quietly guiding my choices. Situations that once would have felt insignificant now caught my attention sooner. I no longer dismissed that subtle discomfort in my chest or the nagging feeling that something was off. Instead, I treated those signals as information, not inconvenience. They helped me respond before problems grew roots. I also noticed how this change influenced the people around me. When I spoke openly, others felt safer doing the same. Conversations became more balanced, less guarded. There was less guessing and more clarity. Even when disagreements happened, they didn't linger the way they used to. Addressing things only gave everyone room to breathe and adjust, without resentment building in silence. In the quiet moments, I reflected on how easily life can shift from something manageable to something overwhelming, simply because we underestimate it. The issue itself had never been massive. What made it powerful was neglect. That realization humbled me. It reminded me that responsibility isn't about reacting to explosions. It's about noticing sparks before they spread. I thought this was just a small issue, but it became a lasting reminder. Paying attention, speaking honestly, and respecting my own awareness changed the way I live. It taught me that growth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it whispers, waiting to be acknowledged before it turns into something we can't ignore. As time passed, that reminder blended into my everyday thinking until it felt natural. I didn't need to force myself to be aware anymore. It became instinctive. When something felt slightly off, I leaned into curiosity instead of denial. I asked questions, reflected quietly, and chose to respond rather than react. This approach brought a calm confidence